Okay, so now we're going to start today's daf yomi on the top of 31a, on the top of Hamad Aleph, Hamad Aleph. So we say in the Mishnah, Shnei Kedarin, let's say you have two potters, two people carrying their pots, Shayimal and Zechar Zeh. One of them is walking behind the other one. V'niskal harishon v'nafal. The first guy trips as a result of what he's doing. He trips and he falls. V'niskal Rishon, the first guy trips and he falls, and V'niskal Hasheni B'Rishon, and then the second guy trips as a result of this guy. Like you imagine a car, a fender bender, first guy stops, second guy bangs into him. Harishon Chayev, the first guy is responsible, V'niskal Sheni, the first guy is responsible for the second damages, for the damages to the number two. By the way, we have some new drivers here, so I just want to say that this is, as a baseline, not the case with American law of cars. Usually we say that the guy behind is responsible, not the guy in front. Here, it's a different scenario. Here, we're saying the guy in front is the one who's responsible. I said as a baseline, the overwhelming baseline is that the guy behind is the one who has the de facto liability. So, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Lo tema masdisa Rabbi Meir here. You don't even have to assume that our Mishnah is Rabbi Meir." What did Rabbi Meir say? Remember, Rabbi Meir was of the position that the niskal is posheyahu v'chayev. The Rabbi Meir is of the position that the guy who tripped, it's his fault that he tripped. He should have watched where he was going. That's Rabbi Meir's position in general. Who argues with the Rabbanan? He says you don't have to say that our Mishnah is like Rabbi Meir, who says that the niskal it's his fault and he's responsible. Now, even according to the Rabbanan, who say he's an anasu, upater, even according to Rabbanan, who say that he's an ones, even according to Rabbanan, say if you trip and you fall, you're generally speaking exempt. Here, the Rabbanan would say you're liable. Why? Because he should have stood up. He should have stood up, and because he didn't stand up, and so from the fact that he didn't stand up, the fact that he could have stood up and he didn't stand up, this is why we're going to say that he's liable here. So meaning you had to get up. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says, no, even if he didn't have time to stand up, he should have warned the guy. And it's because he didn't warn him, that's why he's responsible. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan says, well, no, since he didn't have the ability to warn him, since he didn't have the ability to get up, he didn't have the ability to warn him, deterred, because he was too busy. He was preoccupied with trying to stand up. So again, Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says you're responsible if you didn't warn him. He says you're responsible if you didn't warn him. So that's what Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says. He says you're responsible if you didn't warn him. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you're responsible if you didn't get up, but if you didn't have time to get up, it's not your job to warn him. So the Gemara says, so let's try and bring a proof. The Gemara is going to try bring two Tanaitic sources against Rabbi Yochanan. First attempt is from the Mishnah on the bottom of the next page. Tanan, you learn to the Mishnah, Hayabal Kore Rishon, the guy with the beam is walking first, Ubal Chavis Achron, the guy with the barrel is walking next. Behind him, Nishbar Chavis Bekora, and if the guy with the barrel just breaks his barrel on the beam, Pater, then the guy with the beam is going to be exempt. We're going to say he's exempt under those circumstances. Vim Amad Balkore, but if the guy who owns the beam just stopped, and then the guy who owns the barrel banged into him, Chayiv, he's responsible. So Gemara says, well, why is he responsible there? What's the scenario? My love, isn't the scenario Sha'amad L'Kasef that he stopped to adjust it? He's allowed to adjust it. So why is he responsible? It's a normal way he acts. You're allowed to adjust your package when you're carrying it. So why is he liable? The Katani Chayev to have laws here. He should have warned, like Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says. Gemara says no. Kishamad Lafush. We're talking about a case where he stopped irregularly. He stopped to rest. Amad L'Kasef, but if he stopped to adjust it, he'd be exempt. My Potter. So Gemara says, well, if that's the case, Adatani Seifa, why does the next clause in the Mishnah say him Amar Lo Abal Chaves Amod? If he had actually told the guy who owns the barrel to stop, he'd be exempt, Potter. Why do you have to go to a whole new case? You should have drawn the distinction in the first case. You say, when is he liable? When he stopped to rest. But if he stopped to adjust it, he'd be potter. The Gemara says, well, no, it's teaching us this chiddush. Even though he stopped irregularly, even though he stopped irregularly, if he warned the guy, he'd be exempt. So it's not a proof against Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, or against Rabbi Yochanan. Have a great day, Eitan. Remember to discuss that issue we were discussing. Try to raise it up with them at the discussion. Okay, of course. But try to bring it up as a debate amongst the people at the gathering this morning, whether or not you should really be doing what we talked about. All right, shkoyach. So then the Gemara says another attempt to disprove Rabbi Yochanan from the following brisa. The Gemara says, Tashma Hakedarin v'Hazagagim, the potters and the glaziers. We have a whole assembly crew of people carrying pots and people carrying glass. They're walking after the other. Niska Rishon, when the first guy fell, he tripped. V'nafa. Niska Sheni Barishon, the second guy tripped on the first guy. Vashlishi B'Sheni, third guy tripped on the second guy. It's a multi-car collision. Niska Sheni Barishon, Vashlishi B'Sheni. The Rishon Chayav B'Niske Sheni, the first guy who tripped, he's responsible for the damage he did to guy number two. Sheni Chayav B'Niske Shlishi, the second guy is responsible for the damage he did to guy number three. V'Machmas Rishon Naflu, if they all fell as a result of the first guy, then Rishon Chayav B'Niske Gluhum. Then the first guy is responsible for the damages done to all of them. See, we haven't raised the question yet. We're going to raise it. We're going to raise it. But if they warned each other, then if they warned each other, we're going to be exempt. So the Gemara says, so what's the scenario? Because if we want to raise this as a question against Rabbi Yochanan, so we have to understand what's the scenario. My love, isn't the scenario where he say if the first guy falls and he damages the second guy, and then he's responsible. And if the second guy falls and he damages the third guy, then he's responsible. Isn't the scenario that they didn't have time to stand up, but they're still responsible because they should have warned him. And so from that reason, since they could have warned him, they're going to be responsible. So there's a proof against Rabbi Yochanan. Gemara says, no, that's not the case. No, we're talking about a case where they had time to get up. And so that's why they're responsible. Gemara says, but if they didn't have time, there'd be potter. Well, if that's the case, the Tani Seifo, if the next clause says potter, they warned each other they're exempt. We should have drawn the distinction in the first case and said, should have drawn the distinction in the first case. When do we say they're liable? Where they had time to stand up. But if they didn't have time to stand up, they'd be potter. Where it says, no, the chiddush is, even though they have time to stand up and they didn't, if they warned each other, they'd be exempt. So it's not a question against Rabbi Yochanan in the end. So the Gemara had brought two attempts to try to disprove Rabbi Yochanan, and both attempts were parried by the Gemara. So now the Gemara says, well, yeah. Rabbi Yochanan's position is that you're not responsible to warn the person. If you didn't have time to get up, then you're not responsible for the damages. If you don't have time to get up, you don't have to warn. Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says even if you don't have time to get up, you still have to warn. So the Gemara says, let's talk about this price again. Amar Rava, Rishon Chayav B'Niske Sheni, Bein B'Niske. So Rava says when it said in the brisa that if the first guy falls and then and he bangs into the second guy, and the second guy falls and he bangs into the third guy, they're responsible. What does it mean they're responsible? So it says Rava, Rishon Chayav, by the way, this next piece of Gemara, many, many, many different ways to read it. We're going to adopt Rashi's reading. But there are many different ways because it's confusing. So Rava says, Rishon Chayav B'Niske Sheni. The first guy is responsible for the damages done to the second guy. What does that mean? It means Bein B'Niske Gufo, Bein B'Niske Memono. It means to say he's responsible both to the damages, whether, you have to be careful how to read this, whether he damaged him with his body, like when he fell down. When he fell, Rashi says this on the top of the next page, means to say, Bein shenizak begufo shel rishon, bein shehuzak b'memono shel rishon. Whether he damaged the guy with his body or whether he damaged the guy with his like broken pieces of pottery. Now let's just take a step back. Let's pause. Okay, we remember this law we said at the beginning. Now our mayor says if it's your fault if you fall down, and the other position is that it's an accident. But now, what's the law of damages done by your body versus damages done by your utensils? That the damage is done by your body, that's a person, and a person is always going to be responsible for the damages done by his body, both to another person and to the utensils. But if the damages are done by your utensils, then if it's your pit, then you're exempt for damages done to the other person's utensils. That's a verse. You're responsible for the damages to their animal or the other person's body. That's a verse about a pit in the public domain. So the Gemara says, your utensil can be a pit or it could be your ox. It depends on the circumstance. So the Gemara says here as follows. So it says here again that Rava says the Rishon, the first guy, is responsible for the damages done to the second person, whether the damages came from his body or whether it came from his money. In either case, he's going to be responsible. But the difference is that if it came from his body, then he's going to be responsible, as Rashi explains it, under the rubric of a person who does damage, and so therefore he's going to be responsible even if he damaged his utensils. But if it came from his utensils, then it's a boramazik. He's a pit that's doing damage, and then he's not responsible for the utensils. That's the way the Gemara understands it now, according to Rashi. Because it's his pit. But the second person is chayiv b'nizkei shlishi. But Rava says the second person is responsible for damages done to the third person, only b'nizkei gufo, only for the damages done to his body, of a lo b'nizkei memono, but not for the damages done to his money. Meaning to say, if the third guy tripped over the second guy, he's going to be responsible because his body did damage. He's a person who does damages. But if he tripped over the second guy's pottery shards or his glass, then the second guy is completely exempt because we're not going to view the second guy's glass that broke as a pit. We're viewing the first guy's glass that breaks as a pit, but not the second guy's. And the Gemara says, I don't understand. How do we understand this Gemara? If the guy who trips, if it's his fault, like Rabbi Meir says, then Sheni Nami Chayiv. Then say the second guy is also responsible for all the damages that he does, both from his person and from his body. And if the second guy is not going to be considered like and if you trip, it's not your fault. Then the first guy should also be exempt. So how do we explain it? So the basic question, as Rashi explains, I don't understand. If you're saying that the broken glass of the first guy is considered a pit, then why is the broken glass of the second guy not considered a pit? That's the basic question. So the Gemara says, Rishon Vadai Posheo. The first guy, for sure, here's the distinction the Gemara makes. Yeah, the first guy, we're viewing this price as saying, like Rabbi Meir, that the first guy, it's his fault. He should have looked where he was going. And so since he should have looked where he was going, therefore, he's going to be responsible for the damage done by his own body and the damage done by his broken glass because it's his pit. But the second guy, Sheni Agufo Machayim, but the second guy is responsible. Why? Not because he tripped, but because the Havelol Amod, like Rabbi Yochanan said, he should have stood up, or even like Rabbi Nachman Bar Yitzchak said, he should have stood up. He didn't stand up, and so that's why he's responsible. And so therefore, the Havelol Amod. So his responsibility is not coming from the damage from falling, but just from he didn't get up. And so therefore, I'm a monoputter. So therefore, he's not responsible for the broken glass on the floor because what? No, it's second guy. The second guy, it says that the first guy was negligent. So he's responsible both for himself being on the floor and for his broken materials on the floor. But the second guy was not negligent. His only negligence was then not getting up as quickly as he could. And so therefore he's responsible for not getting up. So I'm a monopater, but therefore for his broken glass, he's going to be exempt. That's not my pit. You dug that pit. You're the one who broke that glass, he says back to the first guy. So that's how Rava explains it. The first guy is responsible because it was negligent. The second guy is only responsible for not getting up. And since he's only responsible for not getting up, it's not his pit on the floor, so to speak. So when Rava gave this explanation, the Gemara challenges Rava. The Gemara says, Meisvei, I don't understand it. It says in the Brisa, Kulan Chayavin. It says in the Brisa explicitly, it says in the Brisa, hold on 1 second. It says in the Brisa, Kulan Chayavin on this ke gufan, upaturin on this ke memona. There's a Brisa that explains this. It says everybody is responsible for the damages of the body, and they're exempt from the damages done from the money, which is not like Rava's explaining it. My love, doesn't this mean afilu rishon, that even the first guy is exempt from the damages done by their money? And if he was really negligent, like you want to explain it, it wouldn't make sense. So Rava would have to say no, levarmi rishon, no, everybody except for the first guy. I mean, number 2 and number 3, they're responsible for the damage where they do with their body by not getting up, but they're not responsible for their money because they weren't negligent. Well, the Bryce says kulan, and the Gemara is going to say, but so va kulan katani. That's Bill's question. It says, but it says everybody's responsible, like Bill just pointed out. So Amar Avada Barava. So we have to change the way we read this Bryce. We have to change it by saying kulan. What does it mean to? It means to say hanizakin. Means to say all of those who are damaged. Meaning to say that all those who are not negligent when they fall, all of them are going to be exempt for the damages of their money. But the first guy who was not damaged, he's going to have responsibility. So that's how they read it. Kulan ani zakin. All those who were damaged are responsible for their bodies, but not for their money. The Gemara says, no, we still have a difficulty with this. What? How are we going to explain that the Bryce is referring only to those who are damaged? If you want to say that the Bryce, when it says kulan, includes even the first one, that's why it says kulan, because it's coming to include everybody. But if you want to say levarmi rishon, that it's including everybody but the first one, it wouldn't have used the word kulan. My kulan, listening on these zakin, it would just say those who are damaged are responsible for their body and not for their money. So for this reason, the Gemara gives a radically different reading of what Rava was saying, of the Brisa. So what Rava says, how do we read this Brisa? We read it as follows. That the Rishon, the first guy, is going to be chayev, he's going to be responsible, bein beniske gufo desheni, bein beniske memono desheni. It's not that he's being responsible for the damage done by his body and by his money. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying he's responsible both for the damages done to the body of person number 2 and also for the damages done to the money of person number 2, because it's coming from his. Now, if it would be a bor, if it would be money, then he wouldn't be exempt for the damages done to the money, because bor is exempt for utensils. So we're saying that since it's coming from his, we're saying here that since it's coming from him personally, we're saying that he's responsible. That's how he's being responsible. But we're saying, so why is he responsible both for the damages done to it from his body and both with the damages done to the money of number 2? Because since he didn't stand up, we're going to view him as a person who's doing damage. However, So therefore, we're going to say he's responsible. But if his money did the damage, then we're going to say he's exempt. Why? Why is he exempt if his money did the damage? Because we have a principle that this goes according to the position that if you have your pit in public and you declare it ownerless, you're exempt. So he can't declare his body ownerless, but his pit, his money, he declared ownerless. And so therefore, this goes according to the position that if you declare your pit ownerless, you're going to be exempt. So therefore, we're going to say under these circumstances, Rava says the Rishon is chayav. The first guy is responsible both with the damages that he did to the other person's body or the damages that he did to the other person's money, because he's an Adam Amazik. Because since he could have got up and he didn't get up, he's responsible. But Visheni chayav b'nizkei shlishi. But the second guy is responsible only with the damages done to the body of the third person of a lo b'nizkei memono. But he's only responsible to the damages done to the third person, but not with the damages done to the utensils of the third person. Why? My time, the havilate bore, because we're going to view the second guy who's on the ground, even though he's a person, we're going to view him as a pit. And a pit is only responsible for damages done to a person or an animal, but not to a utensil. Because we're going to say the second person is like a pit. And that's the tremendous chiddush here, that we're viewing the second person, even though it's a person, we're viewing him as a pit. And that's what Rava is saying. Meaning to say, Rava is saying that the second guy who fell on the ground, he's being viewed as a pit. That's the chiddush here. So the Gemara says, Hani Shmuel, but now we have a different problem. That not everybody says that we can view a pit in the public domain. If you have your pit in the public domain, you could declare it ownerless and not be responsible for it, even though it came about as a result of an accident. That's only the position of Shmuel, the Amar Kol Takala Boru, who says anything that a person leaves in the public domain, whether he declared ownerless or whether he didn't declare it ownerless, we're going to say it's a pit. And so therefore, the second person, since it's a hazard in public, even though he can't declare it ownerless, it's his hazard. And so therefore, he's responsible for it. It's his pit. But according to Rav, who says that a person could declare his hazard ownerless, and if he declares it ownerless, but if he declares his hazardous item ownerless, then it's a pit and he's responsible. But if he doesn't declare it ownerless, it's his money. Below, but if he doesn't declare it ownerless, we're going to view it as his money, and then he's going to be responsible even for the utensils. So according to Rav's position, which we're going to get, which would say that you can't, that if you don't declare it ownerless, you're responsible for your money. How would he explain it? How would he explain this case? Because then, according to the second person, if you're viewing it as your money, you'd be responsible even for the utensils. So the Gemara says, and you can't declare yourself ownerless. So we would view him as money. So therefore, the Gemara says, okay, we got to go back to the first case. Drop the second reading. Go back to the first reading, which is we're talking about the case where the first guy is responsible for damage done by his body and damage done by his money. And the second guy is only responsible for the damage done by his body, but not by his money. And we had a problem. Why does it say all of them? It said in the Brisa, all of them are responsible for their damages done by their body, and they're exempt for the damages done by their money. So we go back to the initial case. And what about the fact that it says everybody's responsible for damages done by their body and exempt for the damages done by their money? Okay, we have to explain it like this. No, we have to say that the Brisa is talking about where the second guy's utensils became damaged by the first guy's utensils. Then we're going to say under these circumstances, we're going to say that's where the first guy is exempt. Not where his utensils only damaged the second guy's utensils. That's where it says, when it says Kulan Peturin, on this game of monon if they damage somebody else's money, because that's your pit is exempt for the utensils. That's all we're saying, and that's a much easier way to read the source. So that's, again, just to summarize, because it's a little confusing. The three guys are walking. The first guy falls down, damages the second guy. The second guy falls down, damages the third guy. So the Lamaskana, the conclusion, the way we read it, Rava says the first guy is responsible for the damages done to the second person, both from his body, because he's an Adam Amazik, because he was at fault. And even if he wasn't at fault, he's responsible because he could have gotten up. And also, if his pit damaged, if his utensils damaged, he's responsible because he was at fault because he tripped and he made this pit. But if his money damaged the other person's money, he's not responsible for that because that's a utensil, that's a pit. And a pit, you're not responsible for damages done to the other utensils. Whereas the second guy, he's not going to be responsible for the damage done by his broken glasses or broken pit because that pit he didn't dig. The first guy dug it, so to speak, with his negligence, but he is responsible for not getting up vis-a-vis Adam Amazik. That's how they say it. Yeah, Josh, you had a question.
So, I mean, I understand first person be responsible for the second people's damage, but how about third people? Well, the first person still be responsible for the damage of the third person.
Yeah, it's a very good question. The Gemara is going to discuss that right now. The Gemara is going to discuss it right now. Was that your question? So then the Gemara says right now, Amar Mar, but then we say, in Machmas Rishon Naflu, Rishon Chayiv in Kulam, if the third guy fell down as a result of the first guy, then he's responsible. The first guy is responsible for all their damages. Well, the Gemara says, well, how's that possible? Machmas Rishon Hechi Nafil. How did he fall down as a result of the first guy? So the Gemara says two possibilities. Rav Papa says the Pascal Orche Kashilda. Rav Papa says basically what happened was that he dropped down in the first. He blocked the whole road like a carcass. He blocked the whole road. There's no way the guy could have avoided it. Or a second possibility, Rav Zvid says Kechutra de Samusa, that it was like a blind man's stick. So Rashi seems to say that these are both the same scenarios, that the guy was blocking the whole road, and that's why the third guy also fell as a result of the first guy. There was no way to avoid it. But Tosfos says a different possibility, that he's saying, no, the third guy had no ability to see it because it was angled. It was like a stick that's on an angle. And so from the angle he was coming, he couldn't see that the whole road was being blocked. And so that's why he says it. But basically, otherwise, if it wouldn't have been that case, then the third guy might have been able to see it. If he couldn't see it, then it's the first guy's fault. But if he could have seen it, it's not the second guy's fault unless he could have gotten up and he didn't get up. But he would only be responsible for his damages done by the person, but not the damages done by the utensils, because the utensil belongs to the first guy because the first guy dug that pit, so to speak. Okay, so that's today's daf. I know it might be a little confusing the first time you hear it, but if you go over it several times, it'll become clearer each time. It'll become clearer each time you do it. You had a question, Jeff?